The Dogman of Big Dog Forest. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Back in 2009, I was doing well and living with a woman named Andrea who was doing better than well. She wanted to vacation in Europe, and I said yes. Then she had a dream and said we needed to go to Ireland on St. Patrick's Day, and I said fine again. After that, she woke me up in the middle of the night saying she had a dream that we were in the presence of two very large canines in a forest, and that she could see the shadow of a gigantic man walking away into the mist in the distance. I asked her why she needed to wake me up to tell me that, and she said that she now knew where we needed to go on vacation. I asked her to email me about it and went back to sleep. I was a little bit annoyed, but if I had known that Andrea's dream would lead to us coming face to face with a dogman on St. Patrick's Day, I might have gotten significantly more upset. So I began to think of my girlfriend as a bit loopy, but she made twice my salary, so everyone else thought of her as the grounded one. Each day she read more and more about Irish magic and folklore, until I started to wonder if she was part leprechaun. And then one day she shouted triumphantly and said she had found the vacation spot her dream was pointing to, and the name of that place was Big Dog Forest. I was like, am I supposed to have heard of that? She reminded me of the large dogs in her dream, and I was like, oh yeah, right, sure. It turned out that this was a location named after Irish folklore, but not located in Ireland. Not located in Ireland, then where was it? Well, it was in Northern Ireland, in Enniskillen, UK, which is only about a 20-minute drive to the border with Ireland to the east. So we needed to go to the UK to go to a forest because it was named after Irish folklore. I was confused, and so Andrea called me a materialist and a Luddite. Big Dog Forest is named after the two mountains overlooking those woods, and those two mountains are named after Bran and Scolang, the two giant dogs of Finn McCool. So who was Finn McCool then? He was a legendary giant who existed in very strange folk tales. Like in one, when an enemy comes to challenge this great giant hero, he has his wife dress him as a baby so he can avoid the fight. I'm glad Stan Lee and Jack Kirby chose to make a comic book out of Thor instead of Finn McCool. I'm not sure if a giant man in a diaper would have sold as well. If you're not laughing at my uproarious Finn McCool jokes, don't worry, Andrea wasn't either. To her, this was all deadly serious Jungian archetype something or other and whatnot. So anyway, Finn was a giant like Paul Bunyan, but instead of a big blue ox named Babe, he had two giant dogs named Bran and Scolang. Since Andrea was convinced those were the dogs in her dreams, she was equally convinced that she was being ordered by fate to go to the woods named after these two mythical giant dogs. And my place in this grand living myth? I was the boyfriend. And so it was that we went to Ireland. We went to a 20-minute drive from Ireland to camp in a forest that looked an awful lot to me like forests that exist in our own state back in the U.S. You visit other countries to expand your horizons, to learn about other people's culture and food and way of life. You can go camping in your own backyard. So I was just sort of along for the ride, there to be the emotionally supportive boyfriend for the highly successful executive, and to keep my complaints to myself. And so we traveled to Northern Ireland in the UK, and we camped. We camped here. We camped there. We camped in the woods. We camped in a meadow. We kept our eyes out for Finn McCool and his giant dogs Bran and Scolang, and instead, we found each other. We discovered we were actually having a good time together. And so we found ourselves on our last day of vacation wandering down a country lane in Northern Ireland boxed in claustrophobically on both sides by tall vegetation. We had failed to find the thing that Andrea's dream had foretold of, but we were walking hand in hand and letting each other finish our own sentences again. I was feeling the trip was a success in that sense, and I was already thinking of it as over. But then the Dogman said hold my beer, basically. Out of a parting of the vegetation lumbered a big old dog. I mean the biggest and oldest dog I've ever seen. It must have come up to my chest at its shoulder, and it moved in slow motion like a turtle out into the path in front of us. Suddenly realizing it was not alone, the great beast reared back, standing up on its hind legs in much the same way a bear does, and getting much the same effect as a result. Well, this shaggy, ancient, horse-like canine had been tall while down on all fours, but when he stood up on his hind legs like a human, then the only appropriate adjective to describe him would be ginormous. The head alone probably weighed more than my girlfriend. She'll appreciate me saying that, I know her, but it's true anyway. So I know you've got that gray wolf model that you like to use, so go ahead and use it because it looks scary. The real Dogman looked more like an Irish setter, with long flowing reddish-brown fur. But please use your model because Irish setters don't usually scare people. And trust me, I was very scared in that moment. So Andrea started chanting something in some foreign language. I think it was Gaelic, but for all I know it could have been Pig Latin. She was chanting at this dog, and it seemed she expected the Dogman to understand what she was saying. If it did, then she must have been pronouncing the words wrong, because that ginormous giant dropped back down to all fours so suddenly and so thunderously that the ground shook under our feet. Instead of making itself as tall as it could, the Dogman was now very low to the ground, all of its visible fur standing up on end, its long, dangerous teeth clenched in stress, its lips pulled back to best display the chompers, and its eyes glowing a bright orange-tinged white color. The sound of growling was so loud that it almost sounded like a car engine. In that moment, I accepted that life is finite, and that mine might be about to end. I made peace with my maker, and I watched as every event of my lifetime flashed in front of me. I was ready to go. My wife, Andrea, however, was not. She stomped her foot hard on the pavement, making a tiny little sound of defiance. "Don't you growl at me, you mongrel cur," she growled back at the immense Dogman beast. The creature growled louder and made a bluff charge, snapping at Andrea but clearly not intending to really bite her. He was hoping she would back down, but he didn't know Andrea. She flipped out, went into complete out-of-control boss mode, and that Dogman was having none of it. It's not like she scared him off. It was more like he just didn't see her as worth the trouble. The beast's fur settled back down, and it walked through another opening in the vegetation, continuing on its lumbering way. Andrea called after it, threatening to do worse if it came back. I'm sure the Dogman was quite frightened by her shouting. Okay, not really, but it makes her feel better when I say that. I told this story last year when my family had a Zoom meeting for St. Paddy's Day. They all accused me of making it up after drinking too much Guinness, but I swore to them, and I swear to you now, that this was the way it went down. That was the only time I ever went overseas. That was the only time I ever saw a cryptid, and it all happened in Northern Ireland, just across the border from Ireland, near Loch Melvin. We didn't see the beast in the forest, but Lord knows he was walking in the direction of it when we did see him. And so that's why I stand by my title of the Dogman of Big Dog Forest.
sure and welcome to our bonny St. Patrick's Day Dogman special. Not everyone knows that the Dogman is Irish. Okay, maybe he isn't really. But everyone's a little Irish today, right? Even me, and my real name when I was alive was Heuschel Liebeschnitz Rabinovitz. However, you can call me the very Irish Dr. O'Death. I'll be your monster of ceremonies for the show. Are you having a good St. Patrick's Day holiday this year? I hope you are. The fellow who sent us this next story was certainly having himself a ball. In fact, he had so much fun that he had to leave the party and walk, or should I say stagger, home. And along the dark, moonlit dirt pathway home, he saw the St. Patrick's Day Dogman.
Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am an American from Michigan, but I had to go all the way to Ireland to see my first Dogman, and it happened on the night of St. Patrick's Day too. First of all, I should make it clear that I'm not of Irish descent. I was on vacation there back in the year 2001, simply because of a string of coincidences that led to me getting a very good deal on airfare. I wanted to go on a camping vacation out west in the USA, but it turned out that it would be less expensive for me to do the same thing in Ireland, and it seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so I went camping in Ireland instead. At some point, someone I befriended over there suggested I go stay a night or two on an island just off the Irish coast called Omey Island. This is truly a fascinating place as it turns out. There's a road you can walk or drive over there on, but only during low tide, which happens twice a day. If you miss the second low tide, you are trapped on the island until the next morning. There are houses, and there's Sweeney's, a bar-restaurant run by friendly people, but mostly there's wilderness, and in the center of the island is a freshwater lake. That's what I decided to camp out near. I could refill my canteen with the lake water. Now, I had no actual idea that I was camping out on St. Patrick's Day in Ireland. All I knew was that it was cold, and the wind blew hard the first night I was there. After setting up camp, I decided to walk over and get myself a pint to warm my spirits. I ended up getting invited home by a friendly bunch of locals who were going to have a St. Patrick's Day party at their home. They insisted I drop by for a wee nip before returning out to my cold tent, and how could I say no? It was from the home of this friendly crowd that I walked, or maybe staggered, back to my tent out in the wind by Fahey Loch, the freshwater lake set inland on the island. Omey Island is a mysterious place to walk through by day, and thoroughly magical and otherworldly at night, at least to me. The seagulls there are as large as pterodactyls, providing this feeling like I had entered onto some kind of lost continent or something. By the way, when I say the gulls were like flying dinosaurs, I'm not actually exaggerating. The wingspan of the birds is known to reach or even exceed 5 feet, so they are literally of prehistoric proportions. There seem to be very few predators, feeding upon a whole lot of fish. So perhaps that explains why the birds grow so immensely large. Maybe they're not the only meat eaters around to attain such large size, but maybe the other predators are nocturnal and shy around humans. After all, if you think about it, we would be their only real competition for resources. I had fallen asleep in my tent, not far from the lake, and I was having a bad dream. Someone in my dream was splashing about in the lake water, and I was concerned that they were going to drown. The dream was upsetting enough that I woke up, and you can imagine my surprise when the splashing sounds continued even after I was fully awake. I stuck my head out of the tent and looked over toward the water, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary from that vantage point. I got up out of my sleeping bag and exited the tent, wandering over to the water to see if, indeed, someone was drowning and needed my help to save them. By the time I got close to the water, the splashing had moved quite close to shore, and I discovered I was walking directly towards something that was walking toward me. In the darkness, I saw something that didn't seem to make the slightest bit of sense to me. What I remember, and I swear this is what it seemed I was actually looking at, was a large brown dog walking up out of the water. I laughed in relief that it was only this very tall and very long dog causing me to have that dream. I remember I put my hands on my knees, and I was about to call the dog over, in the way one calls over a Fido, or Rover, or Spot. Before I could say a word, though, that water dog was in my face, baring its teeth at me, and emitting this strange high-pitched kind of bark, or maybe it was a roar? You could also call it a squeal. No matter what you call it, I was so surprised by this that I evacuated before I turned to run away. I remember only experiencing fear as I ran to my tent, crying. I didn't expect to make it back. I thought that I would get captured and torn to shreds long before getting back inside. But I was wrong. I made it back into my tent, shaking all over, and I watched through the partially open tent flap as the water dog stood up on its hind legs and screamed at me. It sounded like he was speaking some complex alien language, and it sounded like he was using the water dog equivalent of foul words. I was absolutely terrified, and the tent being around me did not make me feel even slightly safer. I felt certain that the creature would rip it apart, then do a similar thing to me. It kept screaming at me from outside for quite some time, and the fact that it squealed in such a high-pitched voice was in no way comforting. There's something about that horrible rat-like sound it made that caused it to be even more frightening than it would have been had it been barking at me like other dogs would. Well, obviously at some point the upright walking aquatic canine left. Otherwise I wouldn't be here to tell you the story today. I couldn't sleep, and at the first light of dawn, I was out of there and on my way to the mainland to seek out an internet cafe. Do you remember those? Internet cafes? They used to have them upstairs in Burger Kings and coffee shops for a while. Before smartphones, when people didn't yet have access to the net in the palm of their hands, we would sometimes go to an internet cafe and rent time on a computer so we could check our email or, in this case, look up the legendary, aquatic, Irish Dogman. I wasn't able to find very much back in those days, but what I did find put a shock straight through me. There was, and is, a monster associated with Omi Island itself, the island I had been staying on. It's a nocturnal water dog, and they call it the Dovar Coo. It turns out that Dovar is also an ancient Irish word to describe an otter, and the Dovar Coo is said to be the king of the otters. I thought about it, and the dog I saw was a short-snouted one. I would have to agree that it did bear more than a passing resemblance to a very oversized otter in a few ways, including its semi-aquatic behavior and the color of its fur. I really felt in my gut at the time, though, that I was being chased by a kind of canine, and in the Dovar Coo legends, it is sometimes referred to as a water dog, or a water hound, just as I had called it. So if this is in fact a kind of otter, I don't think it's just an oversized one. I think it's a special dog-like breed, or possibly even some kind of combination of the two species. This creature, whatever it was, clearly felt it was the king of its domain, and it lectured me harshly for a long time before allowing me to get back to sleep. The more I read online, the more certain I was that I had been chased by the legendary Irish aquatic Dogman, the Dovor Coo, and the more I wanted to stay another night or two and try to collect evidence. After making a stop in town to pick myself up some adult diapers, in case I actually saw the creature again, I ventured back out onto the island during the second low tide, and I pitched camp even closer to where I had seen the creature than I had been the first time. I found a spot where I had a really good view not only of the water, but the water's edge that I had seen the monster come to shore on. I saw nothing that night. I stayed a third night, and the lake was dead silent all night, not any splashing at all. That didn't make sense to me. Did this water dogman only eat once a week? How could it not be out fishing every night if it wanted to survive? If it was migratory, where had it gone off to? This was the only freshwater lake on the island. I came away from there understanding even less what had happened to me. I gave the adult diapers to an old lady I met at Sweeney's, and we had a good laugh at why I had originally bought them. When I told her of my 3 nights on Omi Island, she saw no mystery in it at all. He came to visit you on St. Patrick's Day, she reminded me. Well, if you think that was a blessing I countered, then why did he chase me and frighten the poo out of me? Well, that's easy, she answered. It was because you neglected to wear anything green. To this day, I don't know what the Dovor Coo was, but I know I saw it. It looked like a short-snouted dog, yes, but its claws seemed longer than those of your typical family pet. And dogs don't stand on their hind legs like that. Even after years of private study on the subject, the only thing I can still tell you with certainty is that I saw the St. Patrick's Day Dogman.
I think I just saw myself a leprechaun. Do you see anything back there? He ran in that direction, behind me. You know, they say, if you follow a leprechaun, eventually he will lead you to his hidden pot of gold. Of course, we got an email from a guy who followed a leprechaun. He said that instead of a pot of gold, the leprechaun led me to the Dogman.
Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was hiking through the Bankhead National Forest in Alabama one afternoon, enjoying all that nature has to offer. All of a sudden, I found myself in the presence of a strange, tiny little fellow, who in fact seemed to me, at least, to be quite unnatural. I'm talking about a little man who wasn't a man at all. I believe the creature I'm referring to must have been some sort of representative of the Fey folk, or the good people. In other words, I think I came across an actual leprechaun deep in the woods of Alabama. What did I do? I did what anyone would do. I pursued the little bugger on foot. I knew the same thing that you know. If you follow a leprechaun, he will eventually lead you right back to his pot of gold. So, I set about following this creature as he led me further and further from the hiking trail, and deeper into the woods of the Bankhead National Forest. I wasn't really watching too closely where we were going, as I expected the little fellow to take me in circles on a wild goose chase for a while to try to shake me. I tried to hold back far enough that he wouldn't notice me continuing to follow him, but he always seemed to catch notice of me, and then he would curse me out in some foreign tongue I was unfamiliar with. To be clear, I'm not talking about a short person or a human of any kind. This was a humanoid less than a foot tall, wearing old-fashioned buckle shoes and a green buckle hat as well. Its skin was a bit on the bluish or greenish side, but still not entirely out of the range of a light humanoid skin color. It had no facial hair or hair on its head as far as I could tell. If it did, the hair must have been hidden up under its hat. The large ears, which came to a point, and stuck out far to each side of his face. Reminded me of Mr. Spock's ears from the old Star Trek TV show. So what would you call that? I'd call it a leprechaun, even if the hat it had wasn't green. I never believed in leprechauns before, but I figured if they were real, then the pot of gold must be real as well. Onward, deep and deeper into the night, I continued my strange efforts to stalk a leprechaun. I concentrated harder and harder on being quieter and less noticeable. I began to feel like I was getting better at spying on the little guy as he stopped seeing me and he stopped shouting his elf gibberish at my hiding spots. I was pretty certain that he thought he had lost me. Now things should start to get interesting. I watched as the little man entered a cave. The entrance looked big enough for me to get through, so I waited about a minute. Then I quietly crept up to the cave opening and peered inside of the darkness it held within itself. I thought I could see something glinting down this natural corridor deeper into the cave. Could it be light glinting off the leprechaun's pot of gold? Could my long journey be at an end? Could I be about to make off with a legendary fortune? I stepped as quietly as I could into the cave, but still my footsteps echoed. I looked up toward the glinting light I thought I had seen earlier, but now I saw only darkness. Taking another few steps as lightly as I could manage, but in reality only slightly less loud than before, I felt certain that if the leprechaun were in that corridor with me, he must certainly have heard my approach already. I looked up, squinting down the hall to see what I could see ahead of me in the pitch blackness. What I saw was an image that burned through my retinas and branded itself on my soul itself. The light I had seen, it wasn't the glint of gold or jewels. It was the glint of animal eyeshine. Golden-colored animal eyeshine. I could smell something that smelled like someone had killed a wet dog and left it outside in the heat to rot. It was such a noxious odor that it stopped me in my tracks, and I had to fight my gag reflex. I looked up into those golden eyes shining out of the darkness at me, and I knew that the smell and the vision were two parts of the same whole. And this was no longer the leprechaun I was dealing with. This was something very tall. I turned and ran, and instantly I heard barking behind me. Angry, vicious barking, and the sound of dog nails on hard rock surfaces. I was being chased by something large and canine. I had heard that leprechauns were capable of creating grand illusions. They could cloud your minds and make you see that which they wanted you to see. I prayed that that was the explanation of what was happening. I prayed that the thing I was being chased by was a mere illusion. But I doubted that's what it was. I ran for my life, not sure if what was right on my heels was legitimate or fake. We spilled out of the cave together, me and my pursuer, tripping over each other and tumbling down the hill. I felt its flesh. I grabbed its fur. I smelled its death-like breath. I rolled down a hill with a black-furred dogman, larger than myself and 3 times as muscular. It was like rolling down the hill with a hairy weightlifter who hates your guts. As we both hit bottom, I landed on top of him, which shielded my fall, but utterly knocked the breath out of the great beast. I bounced up and ran, but in that moment, I got my best look at the thing. It had a face, like a wolf, but it had a broad, hairy, humanoid chest and huge pectoral muscles. The arms were like bazookas, and his legs were bent in weird directions, but as agile and speedy as those of a deer or a big cat. I literally ran away screaming like a stupid cartoon character. I was weeping and screeching like a scared baby, driven out of my mind by fear and the realization that this creature, much larger and faster than I was, didn't like me and meant to act on that feeling. I ran and ran and ran until I finally noticed that nobody was chasing me any longer. I don't even know when he gave up. I don't know why he gave up either. With all the sound I was making and how I was running in circles, I don't know how he didn't catch me anyway. Maybe I really did a job on him when I landed on his belly, so maybe he was just off somewhere licking his wounds for all I know. I just can't say. The only thing I can say for sure is that the leprechaun never led me to that pot of gold. The leprechaun led me to the Dogman.
How do you like me walking stick? I got it polished for the holiday. Back home in County Kerry, Harvey the Pooka and I used to call this a shillelagh. It's not just good for walking down the street like a total badass, but it's also great for defense against werewolves, at least if you've had the handle dipped in pure silver. The gentleman who sent in this story behind this next tale didn't think to do that, though. And so, he ended up crying out, "Dogman bit me in the shillelagh."
Dear Scary Stories NYC, I think I might have the right to claim the strangest St. Patrick's Day experience of all time, as I actually not only saw a Dogman on St. Paddy's, but I defended myself from his attack using an authentic old Irish shillelagh. This story began when I moved a couple years back to a fairly exclusive community in a wealthy suburb in Michigan. I was invited to a St. Patrick's Day party by a lady I was most interested in impressing, and of course I accepted. I am of partial Irish descent on my mother's side, and I looked through my belongings until I located my actual, old, Irish walking stick. I think it dates back to before the potato famine, so that would make it pretty old. I've never had it appraised, so maybe it's of more recent origin than that, but my family left Ireland by the middle of the 1800s. I think it has to be older than that, because why would they have acquired an old Irish walking stick after they had come to America? It must have been brought over here by them when they migrated. I polished it up and practiced walking with it. This was majorly badass, my own real shillelagh. That's what the Irish call their walking sticks, and that is what this was, my very own shillelagh. So, on the night of St. Patrick's Day, I did myself up as well as a man can, and I left my home to walk the 4 blocks by the woods toward where the lovely lady we can call Lilith resided. I was never so excited to go to a party. I had never had a chance to talk to Lilith yet, at least not at any length or depth. I still didn't know if she had a boyfriend or a girlfriend or any sort of attachment. I found her interesting enough that I wanted to be her friend if she was taken, and I wanted to be her man if she would have me. Mainly, I was just interested in her, and when I became interested in any kind of subject, I quickly and truly become fascinated and engrossed. It doesn't matter if it's cataloging baseball cards or listening to interesting people talk. When I'm interested, there's no bottom to my level of interest. Lilith had written 2 books I admired before I had the honor of meeting her, and so I was open to being friends with her in any manner she was comfortable with, and to whatever degree pleased her. I guess you could say I was sort of her fanboy. As I walked along the woods toward her house, I felt at one with all of the natural growth around me that my eyes were drinking in. It was just beginning to bud into spring, with some bushes fully green, some trees with pink blooms, and other trees still bare and angry looking like death in winter. It was a warm evening for that time of year, and I remember it being the last truly innocent, happy moment of my life. Then, this thing sort of almost fell out of the forest, catching its balance in front of me, poising itself on its 2 long back legs. It was a dog, and then again, it wasn't. It had a dog head, certainly, but its front legs were so thick and muscular. They bent more like arms than dog legs, at least while it remained upright on its hind legs like that. The almost comical and clumsy manner of the creature's entrance into my life almost made me laugh at it. It was taller than I was, though, and that, coupled with the suddenness of its appearance, had pushed me into a feeling of being quite threatened. As soon as it caught its balance, the thing began sort of yelling at me. It seemed angry that I had caught it almost falling on its face, and it was doing this vocalization that was a mix between a dog whining and a dog barking. All of its varied vocalizations sounded canine. The bipedal nature of its presence notwithstanding, this creature seemed to definitely be a dog. Its front legs may have looked almost more like human arms, and its front paws may have had opposable thumbs, so it could grab and hold items like rocks or prey. But I still would not have classified this creature as a humanoid or hominid. It was a dog, only this kind of dog stood up like a man and had front paws like hands. That's all. I couldn't explain its derivation or heritage or origin, but I know what I saw, and I saw a dog. I backed away, not wanting to get messed up before the party. The dog misinterpreted my desire for neatness as submission to his mastery, and as I walked backward, he walked forward, continuing to bare his teeth at me and whine bark in what sounded like full sentences. I shouted at the creature to back off, but it did the opposite, lunging forward, all teeth and jaws, trying to bite parts off of me but missing each time. I found myself backed against a tree, and when the Dogman came in hard and fast, looking to bite a huge chunk out of some part of me, I held up my shillelagh with both hands in front in a defensive posture. The Dogman bit down hard into the ancient wood, lodging its teeth inside and getting stuck. I released the cane and ran, leaving the Dogman there flailing about and making a terrible racket as it tried to extricate its teeth from my walking stick. Arriving at the party, red-faced, out of breath, and looking back down the road where I had come in abject fear, Lilith asked me what was going on. I wasn't sure I wanted to tell her anything, but I was so shaken up that it was hard for me to come up with some pleasant way to describe the experience I had just survived. It was a man, I told them, a kind of a caveman, and he had a dog head, not a human head. Well, it turned out everyone decided I had seen nothing less than the Michigan Dogman. Everyone at the party other than myself had already heard of the monster, but nobody had seen it, and they didn't even all agree that it existed. One of the partygoers exited and ran back the way I came, as people pressed me for more details about the creature I had defended myself against. It was a dark, brown dog. It had long, furry ears that flopped down from the top of either side of its head. It had terrifyingly angry and soulless-looking eyes, so in that sense, it was the opposite of your average pet dog. This was not man's best friend, more like man's worst fiend. He considered me on his menu. I could tell that for certain just by his demeanor and his behavior. I was truly shaken up by what had happened, and I never would have been so open and forthcoming if this were not the case. At that point, the partygoer who had left came back, carrying my shillelagh with him. He presented it to me, pointing out the deep holes which had been dug into one part of it. The dog's fangs had left deep impressions in the wood. No wonder it had such a hard time releasing its teeth from the stick. He had bitten nearly through the thick and sturdy old shillelagh itself. Well, I was the star of the party after that, as I either was telling the truth, or I had at least put some thought into the hoax I was pulling. One guy asked me how I drilled the holes in the walking stick, hoping he could trick me into admitting it was faked. But it wasn't a fake. It was an actual bite from an actual Michigan Dogman. The cane itself fell to pieces afterward. Unable to fix it, I discarded it. I still remain good friends with Lilith and the fellow who retrieved my cane for me. In the years since this all happened, I have yet to have any more encounters with dog-headed men or anyone or anything strange at all. It's just seemed like a normal little exclusive community ever since the night that Dogman bit me in the shillelagh.
Check this out. I found a 4-leaf clover. It's supposed to bring good luck, isn't it? That's what the guy who sent us this next story thought too, until he met the 4-leaf clover Dogman.
Dear Scary Stories NYC, I had always thought that finding a 4-leaf clover would be like finding buried treasure. I was told that it's so rare, it's almost impossible to find two in the same lifetime. So when I actually, really, honestly found a 4-leaf clover, I thought that my life was about to change for the better. Instead, I ran into the Dogman, and since then, everything has gotten one whole heck of a lot worse. This story happened when I was at a turning point in my life when I was 27 years old. It was a hot summer in the early 90s, which was one of those points in history when it felt possible to do things that had once seemed impossible. The Soviet Union had fallen, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and U.S. intelligence services took to the airwaves, admitting that they had made up most of the Cold War. The Soviets hadn't actually been a threat to us since the 50s, but intelligence sources admitted that they had the TV news tell us that we were in a Cold War anyway, lying to us for decades. This way, the Soviets became paranoid, spent all their money on defense, and were easier to topple. All these things which had been secret since before I was born were now being revealed. It was a time of great paradigm shifts. So we were at a point then where we were openly being told that everything we had ever been told was a load of horse hockey. We were, in a sense, unwittingly being given a license to make up our own new worlds and our own new philosophies and worldviews. And so we did. My generation created new kinds of music, new kinds of culture, comedy, art, and even new attitudes about and approaches to science. Don't forget that it was in the 1990s that Göbekli Tepe was found. This site proved mainstream archaeology wrong and proved fringe theorists, such as Graham Hancock, to be right. If Göbekli Tepe had been discovered even 10 years earlier, it might have been covered over again and lied about in the mainstream. When I was younger, we were told that civilization started when cavemen built Stonehenge. But the 90s were a different time, and the discovery and acceptance of Göbekli Tepe, which was as old to the builders of Stonehenge as Stonehenge is to us now, was accepted and documented as mainstream science. So, when I was 27, I broke away from the life my family wanted me to live, and I decided to follow my love of nature wherever it would lead. I thoroughly burned my bridge back to them, so I resolved to put the same or more effort into making my new life work. On my very first evening camping out alone in the hills of Pennsylvania, I laid down in a field of clover and counted myself as the luckiest man on the face of the earth. And then, literally seconds after thinking that thought, I turned my head to the side, and there, inches from my eyes, grew what sure looked to me like a 4-leaf clover. I was certain it was an illusion, as I had been looking for a 4-leaf clover since I was a kid. Anytime I saw clover, I would at least scan it with my eyes, counting leaves, counting leaves. If I had the time, I would bend down and inspect them up close. My friends would make fun of me for it, and it was one of those things that my practical and business-oriented family deeply loathed about me and my behavior. So I was pretty sure I was seeing double and that it was really just two clover close together that seemed to imitate the mythical and legendary four-leaf clover. I got up slowly, trying to keep the alleged four-leafer in my line of vision. I knew from experience that once you lost a particular clover in a field, it was difficult to find it again, so I was careful about it. Finally, I was sitting up, and I had my fingers on the clover itself. I shook it away from the others and held its head up proudly. It was an actual four-leaf clover. It was the object of good luck I had been desiring since I was a small boy. Carefully, I plucked it up out of the ground, and I examined it with my own eyes. Never had I seen something so green and so perfect before. An actual four-leaf clover. I took out my wallet, and I had a special container I'd been carrying inside it for just such an occasion, although I never really expected this day to arrive. I placed the clover in the clear, flat plastic container so that it could be seen. Then I pressed the plastic together, and my prize was preserved for posterity. I was now going to be carrying a four-leaf clover in my pocket, and from then on, I knew my life would be different. Feeling exhilarated in a way I had never felt before, I literally danced on that field and sang off-key, but with great joy. I celebrated, ate a can of beans for dinner, then passed out in my sleeping bag in my tent. This was a particularly warm night, so when I woke up after some time, it was dark, probably sometime after midnight. I felt so hot that I just took my sleeping bag out of my tent, laid it on the ground, and attempted to go back to sleep there. I felt a little exposed sleeping on the dirt with no tent around me, but I was hot and uncomfortable, and I needed to catch the night breeze to cool down a bit. Inside that tent, it was just like a sauna. Well, I kind of sort of fell asleep lying there on the dirt, half in and half out of my sleeping bag, sweating, with bugs sucking the blood out of me like tiny vampires. And then, after a while, something woke me fully up. It was a ticklish kind of feeling, an uncomfortable feeling. I nudged it away, but it returned again. I opened my eyes to see what was tickling me, and my eyes were met with parts of an immense dog head. I could see a huge dog nose smelling my eyes. Then the nose moved down to smell my exposed throat, and I could see more of the head. All of it was proportioned equally and absurdly large. All of it was like a dinosaur version of a dog. I pulled back and slid into a sitting position, trying to get a little distance between me and the creature's teeth, which seemed thicker and longer than my fingers. This seemed to anger the big dog, as it began barking so loudly that I got an instant headache, with additional aches plaguing other parts of my head and neck, with every single loud, threatening, complaining bark. He didn't just seem angry that I was there. This dog seemed indignant about my presence, even outraged and triggered by it. He was completely flipping out, but stopping just short of performing open violence directly upon me. I stood up to run, and almost instantly fell straight back down on my face hard. It was like that for what must have been a 10-minute run. I would seem to begin to get away from the dog, then he would catch up to me and deliberately shoulder me sideways to knock me off balance. The thing was over 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and I'm 5'10", so it was my size, even when down on all fours. I came to a ledge. The Dogman had me cornered. I looked down and thought that I might possibly survive if I were to jump, but there was also a very good chance that the drop might do me in. I'm not good at judging distances, but it was a pretty steep fall, and it was rocky and unfriendly looking down at the bottom. Now it was my turn to lose my temper. I felt I had nothing else left to lose. I shouted at the dog and made an attempt to establish myself as the alpha in the situation. I actually told the thing to sit. Instead, the epic and prehistoric giant dog reared back, and he stood up on his hind legs. I'm not even sure how to guess what height the creature stood at now. He was so far above me, he may as well have been looking down from the clouds. As I craned my neck to see him far above, I felt dizzy and out of balance, and I remember falling backward. It was one of those things where at first I tried to regain my footing. I tried to keep my legs underneath me. Then, the spots began flitting around the edges of my vision, and things got all rubbery, both myself and reality. Suddenly it seemed like a good idea to just let go and fall backward. What was the worst that could happen? At least if I were to pass out, I wouldn't be staring in the face of a giant carnivorous canine predator any longer. If I fell to the bottom of the cliff, at least I would have succeeded in getting away from the Dogman. I woke up in some hospital somewhere. I don't remember how long afterward it was, but it was over a week. I hadn't been found for a day after the fall, and at first they thought they were discovering a corpse. Apparently, I moved one of my fingers and they sent me to the hospital instead of the morgue. My back was broken. They told me I would never walk again, which I don't blame them for telling me. I do have some limited mobility now, thanks to some very committed physical therapy coaches I've been lucky enough to get to work with, but I still have never really ever gotten back to my old life. I live in a halfway home with other people who have similar issues to myself, and we all have people who need to come take care of our basic needs daily. My autonomy disappeared the day I found that 4-leaf clover. My family never reported me missing, and when they were contacted, they refused to pay my hospital bills, claiming they had disowned me. I didn't think that was legal, but apparently, if you have the lawyers they can afford to have, it essentially can be the same thing as legal. I became a ward of the state. I have to live in state-sponsored housing. I need state-sponsored health care. I'm impoverished and confined to the block I live on, only able to venture outside with the help of others so that I can sit on a park bench. I often wish I could go back to that day, the day when I found the 4-leaf clover in that field. I wish I could go back and leave the thing there. If you ask me, it was a living thing, and I killed it. How can killing a living, conscious entity ever bring good luck? Killing and keeping that 4-leaf clover was bad luck for me. The worst luck of all time. That clover brought the monster into my life, and the monster ended everything for me, eating my future alive as I fell into my week-long coma. I should still be in my prime. I should still be out there, exploring nature, sleeping under the stars, and living out the dream I've had for my life, as long as I can remember. But that's all been stripped away from me by the 4-leaf clover, Dogman.
Are you back? I thought the show was over. Well, I hope you had a scary time, and I hope you're each wearing your green skin for the holiday. If you remember, and it isn't too much to ask, if you could tip back a glass in honor of old Dr. O'Death, why, I'd be mighty grateful to you. Now, if you don't mind, I'll be getting back to ridding Ireland of snakes. Away! Away with ye! Away! Or I'll hit you with me shillelagh! I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804 Lescary. That's 804 LESCARY or 804-537-2279.
What's better than a Dogman story? That's easy. 2 Dogman stories. Which is why we're declaring this week Double Down Dogman Week. We're gonna have not 1, but 2 Dogman stories per day. One at 10 a.m. and the other at 7 p.m. That's 10 shows in 5 days, Monday, March 14th through Friday, March 18th, right here on Scary Stories NYC. Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LESCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.